I've been a walking heartache, I've made a mess of me. The person that I've been lately ain't who I wanna be, but you stay here right beside me and watch as the storm blows.
Hello again, Biology 300 students. Mr. Parker here, checking in with you again, and we are taking a look at ecology a little bit further. This is the third screencast of ecology, and we're looking at ecosystem dynamics, energy, and nutrients in the ecosystem. Okay, so definitely have your sheet of paper out, and so you can take some notes. Remember that we've covered in the two other screencasts. We were looking at the idea of ecosystems and going all the way through populations and communities and how they're kind of grouped together and working together, looking at abiotic and biotic factors. Okay. So moving forward with this particular screencast, we're going to first take a look at basically what all living things are made up of. Okay, so we're looking at looking at the ecosystem dynamics. So first off, okay, all living things are made up of they have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, or CHON for short. Okay, and the compounds that all living organisms have in them are water, glucose, and proteins. Okay. You don't need to so much know the the chemical formula that you see here for glucose, but just know that we have glucose, and we've talked about this before. But glucose is just the sugar that's found within your body, the carbohydrates. Okay, and we've talked about characteristics of life also, where all things require this energy and use energy in order to carry out the normal processes for their life, just to withstand the life they're living at this moment. Okay. So from here, basically looking at energy and defining energy, basically what it does is it's the ability to do work. Okay, it's the definition. And then some of the different functions that energy allows us to do are to build up cells and tissues, growth, reproduction, and responding to the environment. So if you have a lack of energy or the lack of the nutrients that you need, your body will not be able to carry out these different functions properly. Because the lack of this energy and the nutrients that your body is at this time does not have. Okay, so moving from here, we're going to actually take a quick little video, take a look at a video on ecosystem dynamics and energy transfer. So basically, we know that all things require energy, and now we're going to see how energy is transferred through the ecosystem and what role that plays within the ecosystem.
Life exists from the bottom of the oceans to high in the atmosphere. This area is called the biosphere. The biosphere is divided further into ecosystems. These are areas where a variety of plants and animals interact and support each other. There are many types of ecosystems, like deserts, forests, and jungles. They can be huge and complex, or as simple as a backyard garden. The important thing is that the plants and animals within the ecosystem depend on each other for survival. The plants use sunlight, water, and nutrients from the soil to produce energy for their own growth and development. Green plants, in return, release oxygen into the air. The oxygen is critical to the survival of animals. Animals use the oxygen and release carbon dioxide, which is an important part of the plant's food-making process. Some animals, who are called herbivores, feed on the plants directly for their nourishment. Other animals are carnivores, who hunt and feed on other animals. And some animals, known as omnivores, will eat either plants or animals to gain their needed energy. Scavengers are animals that eat only dead organisms. These animals and plants interact with each other and form what is called a community. Nature maintains a balance between these community members, and each one plays an important role. Plants produce their own food and are called the chief producers. An animal that eats plants is called a primary consumer. An animal that eats the plant-eating animal is called a secondary consumer. The energy produced by the plant through its food-making process is transferred to the plant-eating animal and eventually to the meat-eating animal. This is an energy pyramid, with the producers at the base, primary consumers higher up, and secondary consumers at the top. The pyramid shape is used to indicate that at the base there must be a large population of plants to support a much smaller number of primary consumers. Also, at the top of the pyramid is an even smaller number, often one secondary consumer, that depends on the organisms at the other levels for survival. Food chains show how different plants and animals relate to each other in the exchange of energy. Ecosystems contain more than a single food chain, and there is often overlap between food chains, as many consumers can eat a variety of things. As a result, food webs are used to show how organisms within an ecosystem interact through more than one food chain. The balance in nature between organisms is critical for survival. If the secondary consumer dies out or moves away, then the primary consumers have no predator or enemy. If too many coyotes are killed, then the jackrabbit population surges. Now there are too many of these plant eaters, and the supply of plant food available is adversely affected. If this continues, the plants may disappear, causing the animals to die or move to a new location. The members of the energy pyramids actually are of benefit to each other. They help maintain the delicate balance of nature.
All right, so welcome back, Biology 300 students, and that video you should have learned. Actually, you learned a lot of stuff that's going to be incorporated in this screencast and actually in the following two screencasts after this one. Going through the idea of energy transfer, looking at these energy pyramids, and looking at food webs and food chains. Okay, so moving from this particular video, let's go ahead and jot down a little bit more information here. So basically, energy is transferred from one organism to organism by feeding relationships in the ecosystem. Okay, so basically, from this idea is that energy is transferred through an ecosystem. Okay, and it's going from basically the chemical energies from one organism to the next. Okay, whereas like nutrients are basically recycled in the ecosystem, energy is transferred. All right, so we have different trophic levels. We have our producers, we have our consumers, and then we have our decomposers. And when we get into our pyramids and food webs and food chains, we'll kind of show you how they all play a role within the ecosystem and the transferring of this particular energy that's being moved throughout the ecosystem. Okay. So we have the different producers, consumers, and decomposers. We'll go through each one of these here fairly quickly and get you some more notes on each one of these. Okay, so if you look at these, this particular feeding relationship here, you can see we have our primary producers here on the bottom. Okay, and on this side you have your plants, photoplankton. So we're looking at, this is more the aquatic area, marine life. Here we're looking at land life. And you go through plant, you have your primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, and then your quaternary consumers. Okay, and then you can see your top level consumers are always going to be the carnivores that are typically what they refer to as they just eat meats. Okay, so this is kind of what we call more like our food chain. Okay, and if you look here, I'll kind of go through this, but if you look here at the arrows, okay, that from one organism to the next is showing the flow of this energy, or the transfer of this energy occurring throughout the ecosystem. And the arrow always goes in the direction or the flow of the energy. All right, so producers, okay? These are organisms that make their own food. Producers, we've talked about this before. They're referred to as their autotrophs, self-feeding, okay? They use the photosynthetic process to create this sunlight energy that they capture in the chlorophyll, the green pigmentation within the plant, that they can produce this energy which they use, okay, and then they give off the byproduct they give off is this oxygen, And if the plants don't use the glucose or the sugar that they produce, then they're able to store that up as starch. Okay, so you can see that kind of working our way around or through this circle here. We've already defined it. We've talked about autotrophs. We said that they're used photosynthesis. Carbohydrate, which is the glucose they produce and they store it as starch. And then plants, algae, and some bacteria are all examples from different kingdoms that can go through this process. They share that common link. If you go back to the evolution unit of a chemical process that's shared amongst them to produce their own energy. Okay, so this is just kind of showing you, giving you a visual of a photosynthetic process. You get your sunlight, okay, your carbon dioxide, the CO2 plus water, and as the result of that chemical reaction that occurs, the oxygen is produced as a byproduct, and glucose the plant either uses or stores as starch for later use. Alright, I mentioned consumers, so we had our producers, now moving up to our consumers. And these, what organisms that fall in this category are always going to be your animals, fungi, protists, and most your bacteria because they can't produce food. Because they can't produce their food, they're not called autotrophs any longer. They're referred to as heterotrophs, meaning they have to obtain or take in their own particular nutrients from other organisms. Okay, and there's basically, there's different types of consumers. You have your primary, secondary, tertiary, and it could go further along the food chain. Okay, but your primary consumers are always going to be consuming the producers. Okay, so they could be herbivores there that are going to eat just plants, or it could be omnivores where they're going to eat both. And then you go to your secondary and tertiary consumers. Alright, so kind of going through the different types or classifications of consumers, you have what we refer to over here as our herbivore. Okay, and these herbivores eat only plants, and they're primary consumers. Okay, so primary consumers are going to be consuming the producer. That's their main and only source of food. Then you have your carnivore. Your carnivores eat only other animals. All right, so they're always going to be your secondary or tertiary. They're never going to be your primary consumer because they won't eat vegetation. Okay, then you have your omnivore. And omnivore are these plant eaters, or they could be like a carnivore and eat meat. So they're eating either plants or animals. They can fall in within the food chain. They could be a primary consumer, secondary, tertiary, or further up because they do eat plants and animals. And then the last one here, the classification is a scavenger. Okay, and these eat flesh of dead organisms. So these are the organisms that are only going to eat organisms that are already dead. Okay, so they don't hunt and kill. They eat the other consumers, okay, that already died, and a little bit easier to kill for them. Just giving you a visual of each one of these. Your herbivores, there's your rhino, they're only going to eat plant. Your carnivores, cheetahs, okay, that typically what they're going to do is they hunt and catch their food. Omnivores eat both meat or plants, and the scavengers, again, this hyena here, is going to eat dead organisms. Alright, and then the last category here looking at is your decomposers. Okay, and these are organisms that obtain their energy from dead organisms. Okay, so we talked about scavengers. What they do is they eat dead organisms. Well, your decomposers are these small bacteria or earthworms. Are a couple examples. They're going to gain their energy from these dead organisms. Okay, and what they do is they help the environment or the ecosystem by recycling the nutrients. Okay, the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphate, all these elements that we talked about earlier that are found within organisms, and they help return those back to the ecosystem. So if you think about it, I mentioned earlier, energy is transferred or it flows through an ecosystem from one organism to the next, whereas when we're talking about nutrients, nutrients are recycled in the ecosystem, meaning they're getting put back into the ground, and eventually the process starts all over again. Okay, so the nutrients break down from these dead tissues, they return to the soil, and then these organic compounds are broken down into more simple types, and eventually this whole process again will start over. So the decomposers play a very important role in the environment and the ecosystem, in the fact that they help return the nutrients so they can be reused, okay, and recycled for the to the next organism. Okay, so that's decomposers, and so as I mentioned, this is a nice short screencast, and so in this screencast, which is screencast session number 3, we've talked about basically energy, the different type of elements that make up all living things, and compounds that make up all living things. And then we looked at consumers, producers, decomposers, defined them, kind of gave you some examples. And in class, we'll be doing some activities that will further your knowledge on this and help incorporate it into the next screencast and information when we start talking about food webs, food chains, and how all the energy flows from one organism to the next.